And tonight on The Wrap, conservative activist Pamela Geller gets a green light by the courts to advertise a very controversial message in New York City. You won't believe it when you see it. President Obama gives amnesty to an illegal immigrant gangbanger accused of murder. And is the federal government prepared to screen millions of illegals? And the man who shot President Reagan may gain new freedoms. Just how much? You might want to stick around. This is The Daily Wrap, live from New York City. And welcome to the show. I'm Joe Concha, and joining me as usual is SiriusXM host, Forbes.com columnist, and the man who gave me the talk before my junior prom. My co-host, Rick Unger.
It was a very important time in my life. I hope it was.
It was,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And
meaningful. Little Joey.
Also making his debut on the Daily Wrap. How do you transition out of that?
Yeah, really.
Freedom Works senior fellow
Help me.
Tom Borelli is here. We haven't had any talks yet.
Yeah.
And finally, he's the editor of the Wisdom Daily. Rabbi Brad Hirschfield joins us on this testosterone-filled panel. Yeah. Okay, lots to talk about. Fire up the Daily Download. Well, conservative activist Pamela Geller's group, American Freedom Defense Initiative, or AFDI, now has the go-ahead to play some controversial poster ads on New York City buses. Federal District Court Judge John Cordell ruled the ads are protected by the First Amendment. Geller, celebrating on Twitter, placing the word victory over the court approval and saying the quote, "Sweet." New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority wanted to keep the ads off buses because they feared it would incite violence. So, what could be so bad about the ads? Well, take a look for yourself. Killing Jews is worship that draws us close to Allah. That's the jihad. What's yours? And this isn't the first time she has done this. Let's look at some other ads Geller has been responsible for. Islamic Jew hatred, it's in the Quran. 2/3 of all of us, or 2/3 of U.S. aid, goes to Islamic countries. Stop the hate, end all aid to Islamic countries. IslamicJewHatred.com. Okay, so Geller was asked by NBC 10 in Philadelphia why she creates these kinds of ads.
These ads are a response to vicious anti-Israel ads running across major cities in America. So we are countering a false narrative with the truth.
And then Ms. Geller is asked how she responds to those who call the messages hateful.
Telling the truth is not hateful or intolerant. Islamic anti-Semitism is so sharply on the rise that even in Europe, many Jews cannot walk down the street with any symbols, any religious symbols, without being physically beaten.
Okay, so there you have it. Geller says it's the truth. Others call it hate. Guys, is Geller going over the line? You once dated her, Rick. You know her well.
Yeah, that's highly unlikely. Look, you know, these First Amendment cases are very difficult. You need to protect First Amendment rights, even if it's speech you don't like. But even the First Amendment has limitations. If you can interpret what this sign says as being, crying fire in the middle of New York City, then maybe it should be limited. My test for this kind of a situation: turn it around. Imagine that the Jews were the ones who were being messed with in a billboard like that, and say to Pam Geller, how would you feel about that? If you have a problem with that, then you should have a problem with what you're doing.
So the interesting thing about this is that what the court held and why the MTA fought against these is they claimed the ads would inspire hostility against Jews.
Right.
And of course the irony of that is if that ad would actually inspire violence against Jews, it kind of proves her point. And that's the. I'm not a fan of these ads. I want to be clear. I think they're better in some ways than the old ones because that quote is a reasonable quote to have come from Hamas television, presumably which means Al-Quds television, which does regularly teach genocidal hatred against Jews and to a lesser extent against Israelis, against Christians. They don't even use the language of Israeli. They just talk about shooting the Jews. Even on kids programming, you have elephants and bumblebees.
Again, that's not here in New York.
No, it's not here, but that's the quote. And the thing is that if it would in fact inspire that kind of hostility to Jews, the weird thing is her ad has more truth to it than a lot of people would like to admit. So I think the MTA made a very bad argument. In fact, their argument, it seems to me, legitimates the presence of the ads if they're in fact right.
Tom, about a year ago, Pam Geller actually had a contest of drawing the best cartoon of Muhammad, which obviously incited what happened in Paris. Does she do this, you think, for shock value, or is she really trying to make a legitimate point?
I don't know, like Rick, I err on the side more speech rather than less speech. I think we're always better off erring on that side. I think one of the problems that she's addressing is because people like President Obama really aren't talking about radical Islam, and that kind of leaves a void in the public debate. So I think this opens up for an individual to try to fill that void, perhaps in an extreme way, but they're filling the void. If we had the president, we had other leaders really talking about separating Islam from radical Islam, then it would, these sorts of things I think would have less interest for activists who are just basically looking for attention to make a point. If real leaders were making the point, I think things like this wouldn't be needed.
I can actually buy that argument if the point were not such an extremist point. I get what you're saying. Right. So why not step up if you want to fill that gap, as you put it? And again, I may not entirely agree, but I do see where you're coming from. Why not step up and do something that's not so offensive to people and is going to make the point you're making?
Well, that's a good point.
So why not do that? Because Pam Geller, in fact, does want the attention. We all know Pam Geller.
But just like, Al Sharpton will do a street demonstration.
Exactly the same.
This is the same.
I agree with that.
It's to draw attention, because otherwise there's no news.
And
this
just
is an
as
activism
offensive.
way
But then part of the
creating
response
news.
has to be what Rick
I
is
agree
saying.
with that.
Responsible parties have got to step up and be willing to say
And to clarify
no
what you are.
no to Pam Geller, because it is hateful, something to be legal and hateful, but also a resounding no to the people who refuse to put the word Islamic in front of terrorist murder when people are thumping their Quran as much as anything else to get there. And that's the danger. When you don't address those issues,
Fills the
the
void.
worst voices will jump into
nature
it for you.
abhors
Here
the
in New
vacuum.
York, like every big city, we're proud of our city. We're proud to be New Yorkers, and we know we can do it better than that. Those billboards are going to bother most New Yorkers. They are.
absolutely
Not
right.
that they're going to disagree with some of the points
read
you've
them.
made and you've made, if they read them, but that's not who we are in this city. And I think that's where she's making a big mistake, but the court says it's okay.
I wonder if in some way I or this program is being hypocritical. In other words, with the producers, we all kind of collaborate and we say, okay, what are we going to put in the show? What should be the lead story? And now while we're saying, we shouldn't give this any attention, this is a lead story, not just here, so I'm not going to single out the Daily Wrap, but all over the cable news dial.
Very fair.
This is a big fight. So she accomplished her goal because it's not so much the ads, it's all the talk about
Mechanism.
the
It's a
ads.
process.
That's,
But the sunlight's a
Earned
good
media.
disinfectant, as
Yeah,
Lee Brandeis said.
legitimate point.
This is true. Anyway, coming up next, is it possible to keep all illegal immigrant criminals from getting amnesty? This is the Daily Wrap only on Newsmax.